Hi, you're watching theAnalysis-news, and I'm Talia Baroncelli. I'll shortly be joined by Matthew Fox, an American Episcopal priest who just wrote a book called Trump and the MAGA Movement as Antichrist. If you'd like to support the work that we do, you can go to our website, theAnalysis.news, hit the donate button at the top right corner of the screen, and make sure you're on our mailing list. That way you're always notified every time we publish a new episode. You can like and subscribe to the show on YouTube or on other podcast streaming services such as Spotify or Apple. See you in a bit with Matthew Fox. Joining me now is Matthew Fox. He's an American Episcopal priest as well as theologian. He was formerly a member of the Dominican order within the Catholic Church, and it was actually Cardinal Ratzinger who led an inquiry, a so-called inquisition, if you will, into Matthew Fox's writings and his work, and decided to silence him and then kick him out of the Catholic Church in 1993. So Matthew Fox has written numerous books, 43 books on culture and spirituality, including Original Blessing, The Coming of the Cosmic Christ, Spirituality Named Compassion, and the Reinvention of Work. So much of his writings are characterized by a pro-environmental, climate-conscious Christian spirituality. He's here to speak about his new book, which was actually just published, and it's called Trump and the MAGA Movement as Antichrist. Thanks so much for joining me today, Matthew.
Thank you, Talia. Good to be with you.
So you went to the town of Orvieto in Italy. It's just an hour or so away from Rome, and you went to the very famous Duomo there, and you went inside the chapel of San Brizio to see a really amazing painting by Luca Signorelli called The Preaching and Punishment of the Antichrist. And this painting is said to have inspired Michelangelo and even Sigmund Freud. So I wanted to ask you, what was your original impression of this painting, and how did it inspire you to write this book about the Antichrist?
Well, I was in Orvieto to teach a week workshop on Thomas Aquinas, whose 800th anniversary of his birth, 750th anniversary of his death. And Aquinas himself, who was Dominican, had lived in Orvieto for a while. There was a university there, he taught, and he wrote poetry there. But we took this little excursion to the cathedral, which is very famous. Some people call it the most beautiful church in Europe. And I was brought into this chapel, this very large chapel and room within the cathedral, and put in front of this this large fresco. And I stared at it. At first I thought the fellow who was preaching was Christ, but then I noticed he looked a little off. His hair was funny, and it was kind of like two horns. And then I realized the devil was whispering to him in his ear. And I noticed the crowd, which was large. I think I eventually counted 156 characters in the picture. The crowd, some were listening, and some were beating up people and even killing people in the crowd. There was a lot of violence going on. And there were some warriors in the back dancing in all black. One art historian said they're like Ku Klux Klan. In front of a church, they were dancing. So there's a lot of drama in this painting. But again, my very first response, my first words came out of my belly, not my head. I remember, it felt in my gut. I said, "It feels like Donald Trump." And the more I stared at it, the more that seemed to be true. And then I had my work to do in Orvieto, and I flew home and so forth, but I remembered that painting. And when I got home, I did a little research and found that Freud had an amazing relationship with that painting. He called it the finest painting of his entire life, that he'd seen in his entire life. And he returned to Orvieto 3 times. He went to Orvieto just to study the painting. And when he first saw it, it was the year his father had died, so he was still in mourning, and it was very significant for him. And many Freudian scholars say that this not just that painting, but the other two paintings, the painting of hell and the painting of the resurrection of flesh, that the same artist created, Signorelli, in that chapel, that all that really influenced Freud's psychology, because it was Eros and Thanatos dancing back and forth. And all that became very primal, I think, to Freud. There's been a whole book written, I hold it up here, called Freud's Trip to Orvieto, and it's an amazing book. Very well done, very thorough, by art historian Nicholas Fox Weber. It's a very amazing book. And so I actually lead off my book with chapter 1 is on that. It's on Freud's experience with this painting. And as you alluded to, others, Michelangelo, but others too, have had profound experiences with painting, including I've run into contemporary people who were very moved by it and affected in a deep way.
Well, you also wrote about how, or you referenced Nicholas Weber's writings on Freud's visit to Orvieto, and he was mentioning how this painting really influenced Freud's views on masculinity. And that was, at the time very important because Freud was Jewish, he was atheist, but he was Jewish, and he was living in Vienna at a very anti-Semitic time period at the end of the 1800s, beginning of the 1900s. And, some people at the time would have equated Jews with men who were, I guess, emasculated or weak or those sorts of horrible stereotypes. So his views on masculinity were also largely impacted by seeing this painting. I was wondering what your thoughts are on that, given that you've also written about authentic masculinity.
Well, you see, Freud tells this story when he was 8 years old. His father told him how he was walking down the street in Vienna one day, and an anti-Semite walked up to him and threw his hat, took his hat off and threw it in the street. And Freud said to his father, "What did you do, Daddy?" And his father said, "I went into the street and got my hat." Now, that was a very important story for Freud because he felt that his father was not manly enough. He wasn't strong enough to stand up to anti-Semitism. And he criticized his father his whole life for that. And then he began to wonder, is this part of Jewish maleness, that we're too passive, that we're being attacked so often, we have to fight back. And there's one story told that when he was a father, a parent, he was in a park, and someone approached him in the same manner and abused him in some way because he was Jewish. He picked up an oar from a boat and went chasing after this guy, screaming that he was going to kill him or something. So I guess he definitely had done some work in overcoming that shadow experience he had with his father. But another thing that came up for Freud then was that in the other paintings, in particular in this chapel, especially Hell and Heaven, the men are all nude and they're all very, very muscular and strong. And the thinking is that Freud, this touched Freud's interest in strength, masculine strength, that he felt he had not witnessed enough growing up in the Jewish community.
And what about Carl Jung? Because your book is really studied with reference to Carl Jung, the psychoanalyst who wrote about the archetype of the Antichrist. Could you explain what Jung was referring to when he was speaking about the Antichrist, and why Jung was saying that we must identify the Antichrist where we see it and speak about it as much as possible?
Exactly, that Jung says that if we don't speak about the Antichrist and shed light on it, it will have its way. And of course, he felt that about other shadows that humans carry too, but he was especially strong in this topic of Antichrist. Now, as I point out in my book, of course, I have a whole chapter on Christ as an archetype, and that precedes a chapter on Antichrist as an archetype, because obviously the Antichrist is the opposite of the Christ. So you kind of have to know something about the Christ. And of course, I'm dealing there with the Christ as as a symbol, and you could substitute other names such as the Buddha or what have you, but a symbol for our better angels, for what's good in humanity, our capacity for compassion, our capacity for forgiveness, our capacity for nonviolence, our capacity for love, and certainly for justice. So all that is a projection we make on the Christ. But obviously then the Antichrist is not about justice or love or forgiveness, but it's about revenge and hatred and injustice and greed and those forces that all humans are subject to, that we're all capable of, those forces that bring about the opposite of what Christ represents. And so Jung is warning us, just as you say, that the most dangerous thing is to ignore the Antichrist, not to name it. And I know that one of the first people to read my book, and it's on a finished stage, if you will, a mother and grandmother, a woman from the Boston area, she said to me that just reading it relieved this weight that was on her shoulders because I named something for her. By naming evil, you're in a place to think more objectively about it and more carefully, and it's not running your decision-making. One thing that I marvel at is how many followers Trump and the MAGA movement have. And what that indicates to me is that a lot of our population is not thinking real clearly, that we're just letting these energies that are contrary to everything Christ stood for, but also contrary to what authentic humanists stand for, we're just letting them run around. They're like evil spirits that can take over and can take over a nation. So all this, I think, arises when you're dealing with these archetypes. Archetypes are very powerful. There's a Woodman, the Jungian analyst who lives in Toronto. She used to say that to think about the power of an archetype, she said, think about your favorite song or your favorite painting, your favorite movie, and then multiply the energy that gives you 100,000 times. It's like a jolt, an electric jolt. And if this is true of a positive archetype, it's also true of a negative one. And remember that it's not just that Christ and Antichrist are opposites, but that the Antichrist wants to displace the Christ with itself. And so that really ups the ante on all this. It's not an intellectual discussion about right and wrong or this or that choice. It is about the fact that the Antichrist wants to make its own kingdom, which is very different than the kingdom of the preaching of Jesus, for example, a kingdom of God that is about justice and let the justice flow like water, as Isaiah talked about, and so forth. That's one aspiration. But the Antichrist is not only against that, but wants to displace it with itself. And of course, the paintings, I mean, we haven't really talked about the painting, but the painting, the picture of the demon whispering into the ear of the Antichrist is itself so, I don't know, it's so powerful and it's so pitiful and it's so evil that you can feel the energy here that is, that can happen when humans do not shed light on these shadow characters.
Well, I mean, we could also say that people who just blindly follow an autocrat are giving into this sort of herd mentality. They're maybe not being cautious or using critical thinking skills, or they're, they espouse the views that this particular autocrat has. But would you say that the archetype of the Antichrist is more powerful to use than to just say that people have herd mentality because there's something so insidious about that archetype?
I do. I think I've written two other books on evil. One is 450 pages, and the other one is about evil in the Catholic Church in my lifetime. But this book, which is much shorter than either of those, is dealing with an art form. After all, it was an artist who painted this fresco. And another artist in history whose painting I reproduce in the book is Hildegard of Bingen, who was recently made a saint in the church and a doctor of the church, which is a big deal. Only 3 other women have made a doctorate. But she paints a picture of the Antichrist that is X-rated, actually, because he has a very big penis and is attacking people, etc., etc. So it's not as if Signorelli made up the archetype of the Antichrist. The Antichrist language is found in the book of Revelation in the Bible and in the book of Daniel, which is very apocalyptic, and other places. And of course, that's what's really unique about my book. The fundamentalists have been running with this word Antichrist for many, many decades, if not centuries. But I'm one of the first people I know who represents a justice-oriented spirituality, born of the prophetic tradition of Israel, that is, I'm co-opting. I'm taking it away from the right wing and applying it to them and using it, therefore, from a perspective that is a liberation perspective, where we're talking about the getting out of denial about destroying the environment, and the matricide, the killing of the mother, the misogyny that is implied in killing Mother Earth and denying that we're doing it, and all the rest. So that's what really comes through to me as I study and wrote this book. That the term, the archetype, the image of Antichrist is a way to summarize in really one word, one image, our capacity for evil. And I say our because we're all capable of evil, and that's why we always have to be questioning what our politics are and what our decisions are, etc., what our values are. And it's an ongoing process. But I do see a frozen moment here where a whole cult around one person, and he doesn't carry all the responsibility. Things were set up for him before that. For example, Citizens United. It set the whole country up for a politics that was run by dark money, and a Supreme Court that was created by a very shady character within the far right wing, the fascist wing of the Catholic Church. I'm talking about the Knights of Malta and Opus Dei, and I'm talking about Leonard Leo, who himself is responsible for each one of the 6 extremely conservative members of the Supreme Court. So, I mean, this has found real meaning. And of course, the destruction of the Voting Rights Act. I mean, I'm old enough to have lived through the pain and suffering and jailing and murders of all these innocent people, including ultimately Dr. King, martyred as he was, who filled the jails. I lived in Oakland for 35 years, and I met many, many Black people who were teenagers and were in jail in the South in the fight for civil rights and for voting rights. And under the present Supreme Court justice, consciously, they have dismantled that Voting Rights Act that was born out of suffering and bleeding and jailing and even murder. And because it's happened slowly, kind of like the frog in the water, we think it's kind of okay or something. I don't know, half the country does, I guess. And it's simply contrary to everything that democracy is about, as Lincoln defines it: of the people, by the people, for the people. It's trying to whittle out certain people because of the color of their skin or the history that they carry as ex-slaves. So this is serious stuff. And, 800,000 Americans died in the Civil War to end slavery. And then we established 3 constitutional amendments to end it. And then what happened? The North withdrew its troops, and you had Jim Crow, lynchings, and all the rest right up to the 1950s, right up to the Civil Rights Movement. And so this is a serious matter, and it's definitely Antichrist-like.
Right, because throughout your book, you also refer to MAGA as Make America Grotesque Again. So you're referring to the history of the United States and how there is this tension there, how, the stain of slavery on American history, essentially, how the country and the U.S.'s history is very intertwined with bringing slaves from Africa in order to build up the United States' economy and create government in the state. And then you speak about the Civil War, but how there was also a promise in the American Constitution in the idea of all people being created equal. Of course, at the time that wasn't interpreted in the correct way. It was only men, and obviously not Black men, who would have those rights and who were entitled to those rights. But you speak about, the idea there of including everyone.
That went on until 1920, that women were not able to vote. So they were not equal until 1920. And, so yeah, there's this grotesqueness in our history that we have to look at. That's how we learn, and that's how we make some progress. And one of the examples I give in the chapter on Make America Grotesque Again is this one, that in the 19th century, there were 30 million buffalo in the plains of America. And everyone knew that the buffalo were very closely aligned with the entire Native American culture in the plains. And so, out of racism, they went after the buffalo. There were 30 million, and when they finished their job, there were 500 buffalo left in the plains. I mean, that's grotesque by any figuration. Go from 30 million of these beautiful beasts to 500 in, I don't know, a period of like 12 years or something. And then also something I learned after moving to California, because I'm a Midwesterner myself, that I had no idea about, is that the governor of California in the 19th century put a reward for on the head of Native Americans. $50 if you kill a Native American and prove that you did, bring the ears in or something. This is done by the governor of California. I think that's pretty damn grotesque too.
And the indigenous people were also subjected to essentially genocide.
Of course. And then you have the Asian stories too. Of course, the Japanese during the Second World War, everything taken from them, they put in concentration camps, but also the Chinese, who were forbidden to have wives and women to come over and all this, or to vote until, I think it's late 1930s, early 40s even. So, we have to admit these grotesque realities in our history. It's not about beating up on ourselves. There's also been great achievements of our culture, but we can't sweep evil under the rug. And when we do, as Jung points out, it's very dangerous because that shadow will come up in other forms if we do not deal with it.
Right. Well, I wanted to turn to the chapter which essentially forms the meat of your analysis of the book, which looks at the 18 signs of the time, the Antichrist in American politics. And I'll just read off the 18 issues or characteristics of the Antichrist as you name them. And so you're talking about the MAGA movement, and number 1 would be a countless stream of lies, followed by Project 2025, followed by Stormy Daniels' trial. Then comes the 2020 elections, the elimination of protections, denial of climate change and a refusal to work to combat it, a dark money takeover, racism and Christian nationalism, Christofascism, threats of violence, the 2021 insurrection, so-called abortion laws, sexual obsessions, a blueprint for destruction of democracy, a fascist paradise, normalizing hate, support of Putin and other dictators, blasphemy, and idolatry. How did you come up with these 18 signs of the time, as you call them?
Well, of course, I just looked around. I follow the news, and the hard part was limiting it to 18, but I did limit it to 18 because 18 is 6 plus 6 plus 6. And that number 666 goes along with the apocalyptic language of the Antichrist. So I thought that was kind of a clever way to package it. So obviously there could be more. And of course, I talk about patriarchy, and I have an appendix about what I would call a misconstrued masculinity that I think is very important too. And really, especially in the chapter on Hildegard of Bingen, she is clearly, at least unconsciously, naming patriarchy as the primary expression of the Antichrist, because she paints the male sexual organ as being particularly aggressive and destructive. And so I think that she's talking about patriarchy too, without actually using that particular word. So I do think you can see a great shift in history going on, and certainly now with a candidate, a woman candidate, not nominated to be president, that women are coming into their own power, and men are learning to redefine their roles in the world. And it's a struggle for a lot of people, but I think it is a sign of something positive happening. That again, we're owning up to the fact that misogyny has been baked into human relationships for probably the last 8,000 years or so, and it's not sustainable. Patriarchy is not sustainable. We have to find a healthy gender balance, and I talk about between the sacred masculine and the divine feminine. And so men have to redefine our roles in the world and our identities. And I wrote a book about that, where I laid out 10 archetypes to bring healthy masculinity alive again. And such as Father Sky and the Green Man, Blue Man, Spiritual Warrior and Hunter-Gatherer, fatherhood and so forth. These are powerful and positive energies that can affect men and women alike in very, very positive ways. And the new cosmology, by introducing us to Father Sky in a whole new way, that the sky is anything but dead and inert like a machine, which is what we were taught for several hundred years in the modern era. In fact, a star is being born every 15 seconds. So there's a lot of birthing going on in the universe, obviously. So all this brings together Mother Earth, Father Sky, and all of our powers of creativity and joy, the joy that comes with bringing beauty and newness into the world. So we have a lot going for us, especially with the new cosmology. And it now is the time, not only to recognize the oppression of women, but also to recognize that when men oppress women, it's just like when masters oppress slaves. Masters themselves were destroying themselves. Their own souls were being seriously affected in a negative way by slavery. And I think we're still dealing with that. I think a lot of the yearning to put up more statues to honor the Confederate soldiers and all this, I think a lot of that is a sign of the reluctance to let go of the myths that that the Civil War was should I say, fought for good reasons on both sides. No, I don't think so. I think that slavery is slavery, and it's evil, and humans can do better than that. And certainly that's what people like Christ or Buddha or Muhammad has ever talked about. We can do better than this. So, yeah, I think all that's involved in this struggle.
Right. And I mean, there's so much to talk about within that chapter where you speak about the 18 various iterations of the Antichrist. And we'll come to the Unsupreme Court, as you call the Supreme Court, and dark money. But I just wanted to ask you something else on the environment, because it's very clear from your writings that you espouse this view of the environment as something that has to be cherished. You speak about Mother Earth. I mean, that's, I think, initially why there were problems when you were in the Catholic Church, and why Ratzinger initiated his so-called investigation or inquisition into your work, because you were using that sort of language, speaking of the earth as Mother Earth. So you have a very pro-environment approach. And so I'm just wondering, given that we're living in a time where big oil and gas have an incredible amount of power in our societies. I mean, there's so many corporate politicians who are beholden to the interests of big oil and gas. It was actually under President Biden in the first 2 years of his presidency that he approved more permits. I mean, something like 6,300 permits compared to Trump's 6,100 permits. I mean, it's a very small difference, but he approved a whole lot of new oil and gas permits for different companies to basically get more oil and gas out of the ground around the Gulf of Mexico. And ever since 2020, there's been an incredible amount of oil production on public land, something like 530,000 more barrels a day than in 2020. So even though there are some modest gains made by President Biden and his Inflation Reduction Act when it comes to the environment, big oil and gas, they're having a field day. So from your environmental perspective, why didn't you use the Antichrist to also encompass or to identify the evils of big oil and gas in their capitalist exploitation and destruction of the environment?
Well, I thought that I did. I thought that in talking about the environment, that I am talking, and of course about the dark money, most of which comes from fossil fuels. When Trump said that to the fossil fuel CEOs, give me $1 billion and I will undo all the laws that the Biden administration has set up. So it's not at all equivalent. The Biden administration clearly has a commitment to alternative energy and the tremendous investment in that new bill to promote electric cars and alternative locomotion that way. So I don't, it's true that Biden compromised some, but that's part of what politics is. So you have to do the possible. It's not the possible. And, but I think his overall plan, is not something I think, it's out there, is to go zero fossil fuels, and whatever the year is, 2045 or something like that. He has a goal and he's trying to set it, trying to name it. But so it's not at all equivalent that the Democrats are not taking the kind of dark money that the MAGA crowd is doing, and certainly not, even if they do, they're not saying that it's their aspiration to keep that up. So I think there's a very different energy between the two movements at this time. And I'm not saying all Democratic politicians are without fault, and I'm not saying that at all. But the archetype of the Antichrist is much bigger than just making some individual decisions that may favor this kind of energy or not. It's about a commitment, first of all, to be in denial. And the entire Republican Party pretends to be in denial, and they are pretending because it's as hot in their offices and homes as it is in the rest of ours. But of course, they have the money for air conditioning and everything. The point is that when you add it all up, it's the accumulation of evil that the Antichrist names. and what's behind. And now you mentioned the calling Earth Mother Earth. Well, Pope Francis does that in his encyclical Laudate Si, which is a great piece of work on the environment. One scientist told me it's far and away the best scientific document ever to come out of the Vatican. And actually was written by one of my students, I'm proud to say. 80% of it was. And 15% was written by Leonardo Boff, a friend of mine, a theologian from Brazil. So clearly, as you say, Pope Francis represents a very different Catholicism from that of the Steve Bannons and the others who are in the cults of Trump, who are in denial that climate change even matters, or that it's even happening, or that we can do anything about it. And of course, this is one thing I think that is depressing the young people profoundly. Just the other day, I got a letter from a person, actually, he's now an Episcopal priest too, but who works a lot with young people. And he said, the amount of suicides, the amount of despair is just palpable when he's among young adults. And of course, even the question, should we bring babies into the world with so much, what should I say, pessimism about the future? So I don't think there's any question that the Democratic Party stands for, first of all, admitting that there's a climate crisis, and secondly, doing something about it. But it's hard to do, especially if half of Congress is beholden to fossil fuel billionaires, and these same billionaires own TV stations and media, newspapers and radio and so forth. So, I mean, it's all woven together. And if you look at what Fox News has to say about climate change, it'd be pretty thin material there. So I don't think there's any comparison, really. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't compromises made, but I would hope, and they seem to be temporary, because the overall thrust is to build, and you hear this from Biden all the time, to build new industries that are built around greening the planet, not destroying it.
You've just been watching part 1 of my interview with Matthew Fox. Join us for part 2, where we'll be discussing Citizens United, the so-called Unsupreme Court, and dark money. Thanks for joining us.